You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with the Subrogation Support Network Podcast. Today, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce myself. Today's going to be a podcast with basically me just talking at you rather than having a guest. We're going to do this every once in a while when we talk about different topics that are, well in line with what I train on and what I do in my practice. Today, we're going to talk about, interestingly enough, one of my favorite and truly, I think, what I believe to be one of the most important topics, which is negotiations. This is about negotiating claims, negotiating primarily subrogation claims, but it truly is applicable to everything from negotiating subrogation cases to defense cases, even to going to the store and buying a pair of new blue jeans or a car or whatever it could be. Ultimately, negotiations in any practice, it's an art, it's a science, it's essential, right? 95% of lawsuits settle prior to going to trial. And that's those where suits filed. Think about all of those claims that are just sitting out there that are resolved prior to even getting into an attorney's hands. Which is why, when I put this presentation together, and I do this I've done this webinar, it's a 2-hour webinar several dozen times. I've traveled around the country speaking on this topic. I've been brought in by insurance carriers around the world to go in and train on negotiation tactics to the adjusters, to attorneys. And it's something that I'm truly super passionate about. And realistically, it is the one thing that insurance professionals can learn and can learn to excel on that will impact your practice, impact your job, your career trajectory, just everything that it is to do with your role in claims, more than anything else. Right. And for attorneys, on the other hand, those who are listening who are in the legal profession, law school is obviously excellent and it teaches you to be to know the law, right? Litigation, you're litigating. You need to be a good attorney, a good litigator. But a lot of people don't focus on just the true importance of learning to negotiate, of settling cases pre-suit, when in suit, and always looking to find ways to get these things resolved. Because obviously that's what our clients expect, right? If I can get you 95% today versus taking a case to trial 2 years from now and having the potential for 100%, but also still potential for 0, most of my clients are going to take that 95%. Obviously, we're communicating with the clients. Sometimes we just want to push them. Some cases have to be pushed, have to be tried. But my understanding and my experience tells me that by excelling, learning negotiation tactics, we can be better at what we do. So when I put this presentation together, it started off with my putting together a training for these adjusters at one of these claims events. And over the years, I actually, I think as I've told you on other podcasts, and if you know me, I'm a crazy person. I drive an hour and 20 minutes each way to work. And a lot of times I'll come up with different topics and things that I want to learn more about, right? For a while, it was, I want to learn real estate investing. Other times I was kind of fascinated by psychiatry or psychology. And then there was a 2-year period where I said, you know what, Ashton, I'm sitting here in this car. I'm going to listen/read every book that exists on the Audible library and on Amazon relating to negotiations and the psychology behind negotiations. And then from there, I started doing these trainings and I sat down with countless claims adjusters and I'd actually ghost them they call it ghosting. I'd sit there on a recorded line where I'd be listening to their negotiating with their knowing it. And then I'd give a presentation after the fact to the claims team to tell them, hey, here's how you did. Here's what you can do better. So as I've obviously studied up on this, practiced in my own litigation, in my experience as an attorney, and also just sitting in with adjusters, I think I've been able to put together a really unique presentation training on the top tips, tricks that you can use to excel in negotiations. So today we don't have time to obviously go through the full presentation. It's 2 hours, but I'm going to talk about some of the ones that I find most interesting. And we'll have this probably be a 2-part series, potentially quite a few more parts as I continue to grow out this presentation. I'm currently about 3/4 of the way through a book entitled Subrogation Negotiation, which I will definitely be talking about more in the future when I'm done. That said, if you've ever been involved with writing a book or know anyone who has, I've been 75% of the way done for about a year now. So it is a work in progress, but either way, this is something I love. So I'm really excited to share it with you all. So number one, and I think most important, our role as subrogation adjusters and attorneys are really to put on our plaintiff's attorney hat, right? While I'm never going to have a big sign on the side of the highway with Ashton Kirsch, bust your neck, I'll get you a check, or some other plaintiff's attorney line, one call, that's all, whatever it could be. What I will have is I will have the incentive and the need to put on that cap and start thinking like a plaintiff's attorney. The insurance industry in general, and also subrogation claims people, it's very defense myopic, meaning that many people who have come into this field, subrogation attorneys, subrogation adjusters, they started out on the liability side, and that's where their training came from, right? That's where they really cut their teeth. But this is totally different. We need to really reverse our roles and start thinking like that plaintiff's attorney. Maybe we're not going to be chasing ambulances, but we really have to create narratives and get creative, right? Just because we were in a rear end collision doesn't necessarily mean that we're liable. The other party that we rear-ended could be the responsible one. An example of a case that I use for that is that you think of that cement truck case, right? We had a claim several years ago, dark highway, driving down. Next thing you know, our 18-wheeler slams into the back of a cement truck. Okay, we rear-ended them. You'd think shut and dry, done. Well, the fact is, you look deeper into the case, we were able to actually inspect that vehicle. Cement truck had cement caked all over the back of those taillights. Our driver could have never seen them. And despite the fact that we rear-ended them, full recovery. Slip and falls, right? Those are huge. I just had a $500,000 slip and fall case where I was a subro attorney in Wisconsin, but I actually ended up litigating that case as the plaintiff's attorney because claimant didn't want to pursue independently. And it was a winter slip and fall. Most attorneys, at least in the Midwest, they just say, all right, slip and fall in the winter, no chance. Well, I was able to get almost $500,000 recovery on a case like that. We see this all the time. And that's why we need to put on that plaintiff's hat. Just think, if dollars have been spent, if it's a large dollar value case, then it very well may have subrogation potential. We don't have to have the winning argument, right? Not at least on the onset. We need to have an argument we can make, and then we can try to find the right narrative to structure a way to argue for a recovery. Now, one thing I always note about MWL here, 5 of our top 10 recoveries, all in the 7 figures, high multi-million-dollar cases, have been on files that were previously marked no subrogation or rejected by other law firms. When I was first starting my practice, building my client list, that's one thing I'd offer to do, and I still do for clients. New clients, when they come in, maybe they're, relatively content with their current attorney. Well, guess what? I'll come in and say, when they shut down a case, maybe you don't agree, send it over. I'll see if I can help. And on those cases, we've been able to come up with the narrative, build the story, create through investigation, find the evidence to facilitate a recovery. So that's where I always say, in subrogation claims, softer topic, but think like a plaintiff's attorney. You may not have that sign, but it is awesome work. I've always said, people ask me, all right, Ashton, you're in subrogation. What's subrogation? Right? Or my attorney friends, I just had a fantasy football draft a few days ago. They all came and played golf with me. And they're asking, you do subrogation? Is that like debt collection, or what exactly is that? And I get to say that this is the coolest job in the world. Honestly, I truly believe that, because I get to have the hustle of plaintiff's work, right? We get to operate on contingency fees, which is great as an attorney, or even just being able to think outside the box as we do to bring in money rather than pay money. But I get to deal with amazing clients. I get to deal with the insurance adjusters, right? Or the insurance attorneys who they know their stuff, right? When I first started practicing law, I started doing plaintiff's work because I don't admit this to many people, but y'all are my friends here. But I thought that I was going to do personal injury work because, frankly, it's interesting. It's fascinating. The hustle of it's fun. But then I realized I'm spending half of my time dealing with more of like a psychiatrist rather than an attorney, explaining, begging for settlement authority, going forward, explaining just the most basic concepts. But that's the beauty about this, right? My clients are well versed in this in most situations, but we still get the fun, the hustle, the day-to-day grind of plaintiff's work. Number two, as I'm clicking through my PowerPoint, selecting the best ones to bring to your attention. Creativity and action are key, right? And these first few are kind of soft topics, but just huge. I like to say negotiations I write here more of an art than a science. I don't necessarily, I think it's both an art and a science, just thinking about that further. And it's kind of like, I like to think of it kind of like jazz, right? There's all these different instruments going different ways, doing different things independently, but together they make a beautiful song, hopefully, right? So we're trying to make all of the evidence work, fit into a puzzle, and create a case that can justify us convincing an adverse party to give us our money back, right? Defending cases, and this is where a lot of times we have had a number of attorneys that ended up being great subro litigators, but a lot of our attorneys at MWL, many of them have come from defending cases from the liability side. And the hard thing for those folks coming as an adjuster and attorney is changing from the formulaic defense work, where it is very procedural, equally important, but just different in that defending cases, right? And this we're getting the demand, or we're answering the complaint. From there, maybe we're scheduling IMEs. Oh, we're responding or serving discovery. Here's what we're doing, right? We have procedures in place that have worked. They're true, time tested to get to the right result, which is in often cases limiting the carrier's exposure. Plaintiff's work's very different because in this situation, we need to build persuasive narratives, right? Yeah, obviously a rear end collision where the other side hits us, that's an easy narrative to build. But what about that product that failed, right? Or something else that's way more in depth, right? So we need to think outside the box. That's one of those huge factors that I tell all of my adjusters who I'm training is, sure, it's subrogation, but there's so much room to think outside the box and find other opportunities and ways to go. An example, totally not subrogation related, but a topic that I just have always found, I've always loved this, is whenever I really get stuck on something, I'm like, I just don't think I can come up with an argument here. The facts look decent, but it's just the narrative is garbage. I always think of the goats. And what do I mean by the goats? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story because it's me talking to myself and I can talk about whatever the heck I want to. So the story of the goats was I was in law school, my third year, and I was friends with a guy who was one of our prior governors. And he convinced me, because I wasn't busy enough with law school and a family, he convinced me, hey, Ashton, you should run for state legislature in Wisconsin. And I said, you know what? I'm a crazy person. That's a great idea. So I decided to go out and move to a big log cabin in the middle of the Baraboo Bluffs. It's right kind of near the center of Wisconsin, the hand right in the center of it. And moved there and started knocking on doors and, doing the political thing. When I was there, I ended up going in, finding this huge log cabin, right? And we get there, the rental agent takes me in, shows me around. The front yard is beautiful, mowed, about the size of a football field, I'd say, of just mowed grass. I can always imagine my daughter playing there, all this stuff. So perfect. I love it. In the garage is this beautiful riding lawnmower. I don't mind getting my hands dirty, so I'm happy to mow the lawn there. And I asked, hey, lawnmower come with the property, I'd imagine, since it's here for me to use. And the rental agent says, yeah, it's all yours. You're good. So sign the lease, right on the spot. Next thing you know, move in 2 weeks later, and guess what's not in the garage? The lawnmower's not there. So I call the rental agent, say, hey, where's the lawnmower? What's going on? Rental agent says, well, did you read the lease? I'm a law student. I should have read the lease. I didn't learn my lesson there, but there was nothing in the lease about the lawnmower. And he said, well, yeah, the owner decided that he didn't want to take the chance of it getting ruined with you riding it. Says, well, what do I do? Well, the rental agent then tells me, well, you know what, Ashton, it's your obligation per the lease to have that lawn mowed. So you need to go buy a lawnmower or get a lawn service. So now I'm a third year in law school, not made of money, running for office, spending more money than I'm bringing in. And next thing you know, I now have to find a lawn service because I'm not buying a multi-$1,000 lawnmower. So find a lawn service. They're going to charge me $500 every 2 weeks. Well, that's not doable for me. I'm done. I call up the landlord. I was like, hey, rental agent first, what can I do? Nothing. Call the landlord, begged, pleaded, came up with any arguments I could, and they just wouldn't listen to me. There was nothing. I said, you didn't sign the lease. I mean, the lease wasn't in there. You got nothing. Sorry, deal with it. The house is also for sale. So we're going to make sure that you're actually mowing the lawn. You got to do it. So I think I'm out of luck, but I decided, you know what? I'm going to Google this. What are some alternative ways to mow the lawn? How can I do this without spending $500 every 2 weeks or getting a lawnmower? And the first thing that comes up is just this: goats. Apparently in California and some other places, they've been, the more granola-y types have been using goats to stake around yards, and they'll trim the grass, keep it good, and there you go. And now you got goats for milk or whatever else you do. A big barbecue at the end of it, I'm not sure. But in the end, I got a quote, and I called the local farmer. And guess what? Farmer Joe or whatever his name was, he had goats for sale for $38 a goat, and he'd sell me 10 of them for $380. Beautiful. I then looked under local zoning regulations. Guess what? I was zoned ag. I could have goats. There was a shed in the back, and checked the lease. And now that we're such sticklers for lease terms, realized there was nothing there that keep me from having farm animals. So sent over my quote for my goats, sent over the lease terms to the landlord and rental agent saying, hey, my understanding is that you won't let me have the lawnmower. I'm not looking to pay that much for lawn service, so I'm buying goats. Sent it off, and lo and behold, 2 days later, right in the garage, the lawnmower is delivered to me. I have it back. Got the lawnmower, got what I wanted, just with the threat of goats. Now that's a really long and circuitous way of getting to my point that, we can get creative, right? I got to the point where there was no legal merit to my saying I wanted that lawnmower, right? There was nothing there. All I had was the argument, right? The perspective, by getting outside the box, Googling alternative mechanisms to mow the lawn, I was able to come up with the goats. So still, that's my own tool I use in my mind. Everyone has their other ones. I could probably think of 24 subrogation examples that are a tenth the length of the story I just told you, but probably just as impactful. But I always like it. Whenever I hit a roadblock, hit a dead end, I think of how can I get creative, think outside the box, and the goats. Next up, just ask. That's the next slide. Pretty straightforward. You never get anything, especially in negotiations, unless you ask for it. Similarly speaking, just send the demand, right? All the time we get cases in where I've opened the file, I've reviewed it, then we end up finding, hey, you know what? Maybe the facts aren't what we wanted them to be. Maybe the investigation is lacking, or even maybe the insured spoliated the evidence, whatever it could be. I always say, stop overthinking it. Just get out the demand, see what you can find, do some investigation. Too many attorneys just overthink things. They reject cases because they don't have all of the facts, or it's missing one element that you never know if you'll develop later. And you could be talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And we're not asking for it, and we're just leaving money on the table, right? It doesn't mean we have to litigate every single case we bring in, or that every case is even worth a demand, right? But most cases are, right? An example case that I have was, and I think I've even said this in a recent podcast, but the cow incident, right? This is the one where our insured's 18-wheeler is in an accident, hits a black cow on a road. All of a sudden, they strike it. Other law firm sent out their expert the next day, their investigator, to look. They didn't see any breakage in the fence. This is a state where we had to prove negligence on the rancher. Okay, done. That firm shuts down the case. We're looking at nearly $500,000 in damages in total, but they shut it down. Understandable, I guess, because of that. But then we get the case. No demand was sent, nothing else. I get it, and I say, you know what? We don't know what we don't know. Sure, they did the best as we think they could by sending that investigator the next day. But what else could we do? Well, I said, I have the case open. Let's send a demand. Let's send a demand, see if we can do some investigation in the meantime. And whatever we can do, maybe we can create some value here. Just a few days later, demand has been sent. I get a call from an adjuster, and the adjuster for the TPA says, hey, Ashton, where do you want the check sent? Whoa, okay. Send it here. Send me the release right away. Sign that release. Have my client sign the release. Call up the adverse, and I said, well, what's the deal? It's done, over with. Can you tell me what happened? And that's where adverse adjuster says, well, the farmer was directly behind the 18-wheeler that was in the incident. and saw the breakage in the fence. It was very severe breakage. He had his wire spool on the back of the truck, fixed the fence right there, was done. So obviously, by the time the investigator got there, it had already been fixed. It looked pristine, but the defendant knew what we didn't know, that they were obviously responsible and negligent. Something we would have come out in discovery, but without even sending a demand or investigating further, you don't know. So I always say, send the demand, ask for full payment, and then just go from there. Next up, and my probably absolute favorite, at least as so far as it's impacted my practice, has been the general idea that in negotiations, you truly do catch more flies with honey, right? Building relationships in this field is critical. It's a smaller industry than a lot of people think, right? If you handle claims, you've dealt with the same people on all sides, right? I mean, we know the people that are impossible to work with, the adjusters. We know the carriers that you just never want to have a claim against, but somehow they just keep coming, right? But we work with the same people, so we might as well, one, build those relationships so it's easier to work with them and they want to work with us. And two, just it makes life a whole lot easier and just it makes you more happy in general if you approach things, lightly and with kindness initially, right? Be willing to, throw that cape off when you have to if you need to get down into the weeds or into the mud. But at first, it's always about making the adverse adjuster, the adverse attorney want to help you. Now, it shouldn't matter, right? It should be that, in the industry, it should be more transactional. It would be unfair if carriers are just paying out claims to the attorneys that they like. Well, I agree. If I knew that my client, my adjusters, if I owned an insurance company, if I knew they were doing that, they'd be out the door right away. But the fact is they are, right? And my goal is to be the quota buster. I want to be that person, which I've turned into, I believe, insofar as many people are reaching out to me to settle cases. But I want to be that person where the adverse adjuster thinks, well, I need to resolve this many cases this week. My quota is huge. I mean, I have too many cases just sitting here on the agenda. I need to get some stuff settled. Let's call Ashton, right? If I need to give somebody the benefit, I might as well do it for him, right? And why? How do we do that? Well, it's by asking questions. It's by not just calling up and butting heads. It's by talking, building trust, building a relationship. When I have calls with my adverse adjusters, with the other side, I'm taking notes. And I don't know, everyone doesn't have the same claim system, but in my system, I can take notes on anyone and I can refer back to them by just looking into their name, right? And then I can go back 6 months later on a different case or on the same case. And I can say, oh, hey, Barb, it was so nice talking to you. It's been a few months. How's your daughter, Ginny, doing with her volleyball game, right? How was the national baseball tournament for Bob, right? Whatever it could be, these are things that just, it's so impactful. The small things you can do to create advantage, right? It's about anything you can do relationally. It's about even giving small favors. I do this all the time where my firm publishes all these charts, right? And all these resources. And sometimes we'll just be talking, me and an adverse adjuster, and I'll say, hey, check out this chart. Let me shoot you an email. And I just send over a copy of the chart, right? Small favor, but there's actually a psychological principle called the reciprocity principle, which is proven that if you provide something to somebody else, they're going to be more willing to provide something to you. And what I hope they're going to provide to me is an offer, right? Is a willingness to resolve. So that's huge. Take those notes, help the adverse achieve their targets by getting cases off their table. And an example here is a case that I handled. I call it the Mr. S case because I don't really want to disclose this guy's last name, but it was a personal injury case. And as I said, I do almost exclusively subrogation, but every once in a while, I'll do a JPA on behalf of a work comp carrier or actually represent a client on a personal injury case to keep my teeth sharp. I had a case in Wisconsin. It was a friend's uncle. He was hit by a truck, rear end collision, really soft tissue. It was about $6,500, I believe, in medical benefits. The guy wasn't working at the time, so he didn't have a significant wage loss case or anything. I got out of demand, and we'll talk about anchoring in a little bit, but I sent an anchored demand where I found all of the possible damages I could reasonably justify, and I tossed it out at him. And I think it was, $175,000 or something. Understand on a $6,500 med claim. And there you go. Sent it out there. We're going back and forth, right? I'm having my calls with the adverse adjuster, whose name's Marsha for the TPA. And one day I get a call from my client, Mr. S. And Mr. S says, Ashton, it's me. My car broke down. I have no money. I don't know what to do. I know I have this case. Is there any chance you can try to get me something? I have give you authority, settle it at or above anywhere near $5,000. I need $2,500 now, or else I can't, get to see my family or get to doctor's appointments, whatever it was. And this guy had a lot of pre-existing conditions, a lot of issues. He was long time drug abuse issues as well, and just a lot of stuff that made it so he was not a good plaintiff. This was not a solid case. $6,500. Usually use 2 to 4 times the medical benefits to come upon your total demand. So we're talking about a $10,000 to $20,000 case max. Okay, call Marsh up. I know that my client just says I need something done. Got my marching orders. Call up Marsha, and I have still remember one of my partners was sitting in the office next to me and heard me talking about it, and still it mentions it to this day. But my response is, Marsha, so good to hear from you today. Tell me about how Ginny's doing with her volleyball game. Yeah, it's all good. 3 minutes of small talk. Next thing you know, I get into this and I say, Mr. S, he's on hard times. He's a great guy, but he's struggling. After this incident, he's really been kind of lost. We have the opportunity today to do a really great thing together, Marsha. What I'd like to do is I'd like to try to get this case settled so we can both go into the weekend, understand it was a Friday, and we can enjoy it, both smiling. I can have a beer on my front porch and just know that I did something to help this guy and we got a case off of your table pre-suit. Okay. I said it, expecting maybe I'll get, 10,000, 7,500 on the table. First offer to me, well, Ashton, what would you think if we could get this done around the $65,000 range? And I kept my poker face on. And another one that we'll talk about later is always counter, came back at 75, got it done, I think 70 grand, right? Something in that range. And I was able to call my client up and say, hey, Mr. S, you know how you wanted $5,000? Well, what do you think about 70,000? And obviously he was very happy about that. But in the end, that's in one of the many examples that I have that always remind me. I would have never, this is a $10,000 case max if I was able to just approach them and say, hey, let me tell you why I'm right, you're wrong, and why my case is amazing. No, but instead I approached it relationally, built that relationship, and was able to get that case resolved. And understand that adjuster probably should be fired. I know that's what most people are thinking listening right now. But in the end, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to get as much as I can for my client. Another reason why this is important is, as I mentioned earlier, the industry, the claims industry in general, it's small, right? We talk to the same adjusters all the time, specifically if you deal with products cases, right? I can say that some of the washing machine manufacturers, as an example, one of them in particular, I'm not going to mention the name, but they have only 5 adjusters, handlers on these cases. I know all of them by name because I have so many cases against them. And now I call them up and they say, hey, Ashton, what's going on? I talk to them for a few minutes and, all right, you got another one? Got another one. Typically my clients are expecting, I think industry average is 25 to 50% on these claims. I'm getting them done across the board right away at about 75 to 80% just by making the call, right? So, it's about building those relationships and being in a position where the other side trusts you. They also know that you're not afraid to litigate these cases because most of these relationships are built on the willingness to actually start costing them money. But something I always like to keep in the back of your mind, and one thing you can implement immediately, and it will make your negotiating that much better. As we mentioned, I sat and I ghosted and still do a lot of adjusters to watch what they're doing. And this is probably the number one most lacking thing because when I'm sitting there, I'm listening to the adjusters and they know their facts so well, right? They know all the facts. And the other side, they know their facts so well. So when that call happens, you just have 2 bulldogs going at each other, just yelling facts back and forth. And both sides already has their decision made, right? Nobody's convincing anybody at that point, and it doesn't go anywhere. So that's where, if we have to argue the facts and start going aggressive like that, we might as well do that at some point. But initially, we kindly ask, hey, pay me. Let's just get it done. In a similar vein is the next one, and it's the idea of win-win deals. there's several books on this about, win-win, or as the mediators always say, hey, nobody's ever going to be happy, but when everyone isn't happy, that means that, it's a good result. I don't buy into that at all, right? My goal is to be cutthroat, win at all costs for my clients. Well, not all costs, all ethical costs within reason. And, but win-win isn't necessarily the way that this ever works. You're never going to have a situation where both sides actually win in a negotiation on the subrogation case. But what you can do is you can structure your arguments to be focused on the concept of win-win. And the reason I say that is when I'm trying to come up with my narrative, what's my story to convince the adverse party to negotiate with me and to pay me what I want them to, they're never going to pay me when I say, hey, here's what you need to give me for me to win, right? No, I need to sell them on their giving me the win being a win for them. So that's where I always keep this whole win-win perspective in there, because it's about always keeping in the back of your mind that when you are coming up with your argument to the adversary, right, we want to be thinking, what can I say to them? I know what I want, but what can I say to them to make them think that giving me that thing I want is going to be a huge catastrophic win for their end, right? And it could be the facts of the case. It could be, with stressing excess exposure, right? Maybe it's going to be a limit that you're trying to get tendered on it. Maybe you're stressing defense costs, or maybe they're going to have to start spending a lot of money on experts. Whatever it could be, those are all huge factors there. So next up, let's talk about the hardest one for me, the hardest negotiation rule. And that's the idea of using your ears. And the rule that they refer to this as is the 70-30 rule. What that means is we should be striving in negotiations to spend 70% of our time listening and 30% speaking or talking. Frankly, this is impossible. Up until maybe just a few years ago, despite my trying over and over and over again to get in line with this rule, it's really hard. It's really hard for attorneys because, frankly, attorneys love to hear themselves speak, and those in the insurance industry, because we know the facts. We know what's fair, right? We are dedicating ourselves to these issues, and we just think it's ridiculous that the adversary isn't coming onto our court, right? Understanding our facts, wanting to pay us. So I always just encourage everyone, listen more. You learn more by listening, right? Active listening, asking questions rather than just giving answers. Don't just sit there thinking about your next response, but actually be actively listening and understanding what they're saying. So many times I've been on the phone with an adverse attorney. They're just expecting me to just go into my case. I'm like, no, I'm going to let them spill the beans. I want them to tell me everything that they know about their case. Tell me why you think your case is so great. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to say almost nothing, right? I don't want you to know how to defend this case, but I want to know exactly what you're going to use as your defense. So I'm gaining leverage, right? I'm letting them talk. I'm letting them say more. I'm asking diagnostic questions. In doing so, the amount of information that can be disclosed is staggering, right? I've had limits disclosed in states where there's no mandatory limit disclosures. I've had adverse parties come to me and adverse counsel says, hey, you know what? We're on the phone, off the record. If you ask me for 75% right now in a demand, I'm going to be able to get it done, right? There are different things that you'd never catch, right? When you're just talking and thinking about the next thing you're going to say. When you're actively listening, one, it builds better relationships. Your adversary, your partner, whomever it could be, they really learn to appreciate you more, and you'll have a better way to communicate with that being the case. Plus, you gain more leverage, and you can just learn so much more in doing so. Next up, knowledge as leverage. This is a slide I put in there kind of late in the game because it's kind of just assumed by every adjuster. But I also think it's just essential that we just touch on this. And it's the idea that in claims, knowledge is power, power is leverage, and leverage is going to be money, right? The person and the individual who takes the time, the effort, does the investigation necessary to know more things is going to have more leverage. You want to know the most about the facts of your case, right? You want to know the legal basis for your claim, obviously. Practical legal aspects. There's different things that, having good attorneys on board can be huge. The judges, the local rules, recent case decisions, the jury pool that's probably going to be pulled, all of those things can have impacts on the value of your case. And by knowing those things, you're going to be able to build your roadmap to settlement, to negotiations so much better. And finally, knowledge is leverage, knowledge and negotiation skills. The party who's the better negotiator, it can't be said enough, is going to gain leverage in general. You're going to feel more confident, feel more comfortable, and just have certain skill sets and certain skills that's going to allow you to just roll over opponents at time, or rather than roll over, to just kindly ask them to give you what you want and get it. So another thing on this is, investigation is key. Take the time. I always say that in early investigation, the cost you spend and the time you spent early in the claim is going to be inversely proportionate to the amount of money and time you spent in the total claim. Facts deteriorate, witnesses deteriorate and disappear. Things change. Spend the time up front getting the investigation done, because investigation is key to any claim and has a direct relationship to how we negotiate later on. Don't recreate the wheel, right? This can be huge because there's so many online resources available out there, right? Especially when it comes to knowing the legal basis for your claim. My firm, MWL, we've got charts, legal blogs, resources. There's some amazing podcasts like this one right here that you can listen to. But it's really about knowing where to get this material so that you can toss that in demand letters. You can know where to refer to, because if you can go forward to your adversary and make them either know or feel that you somehow have the the advantage to them on the understanding of the law or the facts of the case, you gain leverage. They're going to be more willing to negotiate with you for a higher value. An example I have would be, many of you have met, actually, we should probably have a presentation on this or a podcast, but the MCS 90 endorsement. I'm not going to get into in depth, but long story short, MCS 90, it's an endorsement that is included in most liability policies for commercial auto, like motor carriers traveling interstate in the United States. Basically, what it does is it says that if insurance is denied for one of a number of reasons, like the vehicle wasn't listed on the policy, then that insurance carrier is still obligated to pay for any damage to the public, right? Super unique. I use this all the time. If we have a claim denied by, the carrier for ABC Trucking Company and, or XYZ motor carrier, and next thing you know, coverage is denied because they didn't appropriately list their policy on the vehicle, or is an excluded driver, whatever reason. Well, under the endorsement, I can pursue them for the damage anyway. I get a judgment against the defendant motor carrier, then I can enforce that judgment. Well, this is a really kind of confusing and unique area of law and issue. So most of the times when I'm handling these cases, I make a demand. You can tell that the adverse attorney, my opposing counsel on it, their eyes just glaze over. Like, what the heck is this? I have no idea. And frankly, they should research it, but a lot of times they just take my word for it, right? And when they're taking my word for such an issue, when they give me the benefit of the doubt, I'm gaining huge advantage there, right? I'm getting a lot of leverage in that case. So always, always, always keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind would be the form of communication. I'm going to skip through about 8 of these now that we'll touch on the next time, just to give you a little recap. We're going to talk in the next one of these about setting the anchor and adjustment heuristic, framing, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. And then saying no to template tactics. But we're going to go past those to talk about the next one, which today we'll discuss form of communication. Now, what do I mean by form of communication? I mean just that. How are you communicate, and what be it technological mechanisms you're using? Are you on the phone? Are you sending emails? Are you doing Zoom calls? Are you meeting in person? What are you doing? Now, it's going to be super case specific, but one thing I've come to learn is that people in the insurance industry and just people in general right now, email has become really the communications choice du jour of everybody, right? Everybody is just emailing back and forth. There's no tone. It's just, here's the email, next email, which is great in some situations. But in the end, I always encourage all of my adjusters I train and my attorneys, pick up the phone, especially if you're the better negotiator, or if you have any additional communication skills. You can get so much more information over the phone that you will never get via email. Example, In email, everyone really thinks about what they're going to say. Most people read their emails at least twice, which you should, for grammar, because emails, I always tell my team, emails should be sent as if they're a formal document. So you want to make sure you don't have spelling errors, things that shouldn't be in there. But over the phone, it's way more stream of thought. Nobody's ever going to accidentally disclose policy limits in an email. And nobody's going to start give you tips on, hey, make that 75% offer or whatever via email, because they know that email can be reviewed. You can see something later. Over the phone, people are way more honest. They're willing to disclose sometimes inappropriate or helpful information that wouldn't be disclosed otherwise. So I always encourage anyone listening today, start being more strategic over what mechanism, what communication modes to use, right? I think Zoom's awesome, or be it Zoom video calls, whatever it could be, great things to implement. I'm also kind of fascinated, but we won't go into it because it's kind of, some people consider this like voodoo science in a way, but I'm also super fascinated by some things that they call control tactics, which I'm adding some more in my next presentation that we'll discuss on podcast in a few weeks. But there are really unique things that involve just the psychology of communications. For example, there are strategies where you can use the decision where you make the call. If you make the call, you can gain additional leverage by setting somebody off base, depending on what you're going for. If you call earlier in the day, it forms a stronger impression, right? People have a better chance of remembering what you had to say to them. Interestingly enough, closer proximity to mealtimes, closer to the mealtime, there's increased glucose that comes out, and it reduces aggressiveness. Physical warmth. So a lot of times coffee, increasing the temperature, has an impact on the insular cortex, and it can cause an increase in friendliness. Now, these are all really small, very small percentage basis increases in different things, but it's significant enough to truly be fascinating to me. And I strongly encourage everybody to kind of research and just do some Google searching on the psychosomatic and the various ways that, your brain can be impacted by, be it different things such as, just that time of the day that you're contacted, physical warmth, and various other things. Practice and prepare. Practice, right? Everyone always says that. But why is this so important? Before any negotiation that I have, it could be a $10,000 water supply line case or a $10 million wildfire claim, right? Whatever it is, if I'm potentially going to be negotiating with another party in a mediation, over the phone, in person, wherever, I am always taking the time to prepare. $10,000 case, who knows? Maybe I'll spend 10 minutes, right? Maybe I'll spend 10 hours if it's a big mediation going on over a multi-million-dollar case. But either way, it's about finding the things that work right for you to prepare and really get into the head of your adversary before you start negotiating, right? Even on those smaller cases, take 15 minutes before the phone call, review your notes, come to terms. And the best thing for me is the idea of playing devil's advocate, right? So I'm trying to get into my adversary's head and say, well, here's my argument. When I put that forward and convey this, what are they going to say to me in response? What I'll do pretty often is I'll bring in one of my associates to sit across my desk for me. I'll tell them, hey, review the facts for an hour, and then you're going to come in and you're going to argue as if you're me, and I'm going to review the facts, and I'm going to argue as if I'm the other attorney, right? I'm opposing counsel in this case. And frankly, that is probably the most impactful thing I can do to prep and prepare for a mediation or for some sort of, be it a settlement negotiation of any kind, because now I know, I'm a few steps ahead, right? I know that when I make this argument, they're going to say this. So now I've already formulated my argument to that and even a few steps forward, right? So it's about taking things from one dimension and moving it to, it's the idea of, playing 3D or even 4-dimensional chess, right? We're going back and forth. We're trying to get ahead of this, and we're using practice and preparation to make sure that we're always getting to our advantage. Another impactful one that you can implement immediately is the idea of always countering, right? I tell my client, we're going to keep negotiating until we know for sure there's nothing left on the table. This can scare clients, and especially new adjusters and people that are new to claims, pretty often, where I have to have those conversations with a new adjuster because maybe we have a case, let's say it's a $100,000 loss. My client would be ecstatic with 50%. Well, I come to them saying, hey, We got 80% on the table. And they say, well, take it immediately. Take it and run. Let's be done. Well, my response is no, always counter. If that just was put out there and this is an 80% offer, why wouldn't I come back at 95%, right? We're talking about that's $15,000. We're talking about a $100,000 case, right? And sometimes clients, adjusters, they get fearful because then, hey, I'm going to have to go to my supervisor and explain that I totally gave up this settlement when I had all this money on the table because I got greedy. Now, I always say when negotiating, it's my job to be greedy. It's my job to get as much as possible. And if there was a true risk to having these offers pulled, I'd probably say, why take the risk on some of these? But I have learned in my practice, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens of other people and asked them that same exact question. How many times in a negotiation have you had an offer pulled simply because you countered, right? And we're not talking about, hey, 3 weeks later I countered. We're talking about in that actual negotiated, be it 5 minutes later or a few hours later, you came back with a different number. The answer is, I think of hundreds and hundreds of cases I've handled, of the thousands and thousands of claims handled by the people I've asked, I've heard of 3 times that's ever happened. Never happened to me, right? 3 times. And all of them kind of had unique examples where one of them was, it was 6 hours later, but there was a new adjuster brought on and various other things. But in the end, it's come out. The one thing I can say with absolute certainty is that the dollar value benefit to countering is 100% justified given the tiny little chance that there's going to be a case pulled at some point in your career. So I always say, always negotiate. Every single day I'm negotiating claims. At least 2-3 times a week, I get a case where we're at a great place. We could still get a little bit more, come back $5,000 more and we get it done, right? That's an additional $5,000 for the carrier. So I always say, try to do it. Plus, the way you can justify it too is studies have shown that adversaries are happier when the first offer isn't accepted. So always just keep negotiating because why not? Now, last but not least, I just want to briefly touch on, how to train yourself to negotiate better. I always encourage, let's start with my daughter, right? I have a 14-year-old daughter who I've been training to negotiate since she was probably born. And she is now to the point where she's frankly way better at negotiating than I am because she can use emotions in it too, which is fantastic. But in the end, when I was training her, it's about going out there and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, right? I'd have her go up to the server and, put her order in, when she didn't even understand what she was asking for. Small things, right? Over the years, and we start just getting people to start doing things that maybe, when it comes to communications, a little bit outside of their comfort zone. A lot of people these days, they have the hardest time even picking up the phone and talking to a customer service representative or dealing with any sort of confrontation, right? I have a family member who I have to call up and deal with any bills that they're negotiating because they're too uncomfortable doing so. It's that comfortableness with the uncomfortable that makes you a better negotiator. And asking for money, begging for money, that's super uncomfortable for a lot of people, which is why I encourage everyone who works for me, works with me, everybody who I train, anybody listening now, start negotiating on a day-to-day basis, right? This sounds crazy, but I'd say when you go to the store, when you go to buy that pair of jeans, ask for a special deal. Say, hey, and I do this all the time, and it's my wife and my daughter don't want to shop with me anymore. And side note, don't tell them, but that was probably my goal in the first place because I hate shopping. But in the end, I've got my little, 7-month-old daughter with me, and I'll ask, hey, you got the cute baby discount? And do you know what? At least 50% of the time, they give me a discount just for the heck of it, just because I asked for it, right? I was at a conference just a few weeks ago, East Coast, and went to I was at the front desk checking in, and I said, hey, do you have that I just flew for 6 hours and I'm exhausted and really want to take a nap special upgrade for rooms? And guess what? Give me this huge corner suite with windows all looking over this bay and all this stuff. Just because I asked. So one, by negotiating everything, right? Your pair of jeans, your Kit Kat bar at the gas station, I don't care what it is. it makes you better day to day. So I was encouraging anything you can negotiate, do it. Maybe not in your, in your home life, because frankly, you don't want to create any animosity with your significant other. But when it comes to going around shopping, anything you can do to kind of get out of your comfort zone, to be working on your negotiation skills, will just make you so much better. So that's really how I always like to end these things is, you can negotiate anything, and assuming that, you got the buy-in of your, significant other, spouse, whomever, and that they're okay with, either not being there or dealing with you as you embarrass the heck out of yourself. Trust me, it works, and it will help impact how you negotiate going forward in your career. So that's really all I have today. We're going to do a part 2 series because we did only cover about half of the slides that I usually like to go through. But ultimately, I think that this stuff is going to be, it's helpful. It's fascinating to me. I ask you, tune in. I think we'll do it in probably, I'd say 4 weeks from now or so. We'll do the next negotiation one. My wonderful co-partner in crime here, Emma, who coordinates the webinar, I'm sure she'll find me a good time and say, well, you already have something in a few weeks. But either way, we'll get it going soon. But again, enough from me. I'm about done talking it myself, but good talking to y'all. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today on this podcast, this episode of the Subrogation Support Network. Signing off, Ashton Kirsch. Thanks for joining.